Darren Berg offers his clients big returns on real estate investments, but he's actually running a multi-million-dollar scam.
He really used the trappings of wealth as a big sales pitch to his investors.
In addition to using his clients' cash to fund the high life, he also used it to launch a lifelong obsession dating back to his college days at the University of Oregon.
Darren Berg was fascinated with buses. His grandfather had been a bus driver, and he heard stories about, his grandfather driving a bus and traveling around, and that really appealed to him. And it stuck with him as an adult.
So Berg cooked up the idea to launch a luxury motor coach company with a fleet of buses catering to high-end clientele.
They were leased out to sports teams, to politicians. The governor of Washington was running for re-election, and she chartered one of his buses for his campaign.
Like always, Berg was able to get away with his high-flying business schemes because his sleek salesmanship lured fresh blood into his web of lies. But also, like always, the golden boy ran off with the gold when his bus company went south.
The key to the Ponzi scheme was always having fresh investors, bringing in new cash. Early on, some of these ones were actually legitimate, but as the years went on, the Ponzi scheme became more prevalent, and he became, deeper and deeper in debt.
And right when the king of investor scams, Bernie Madoff, fell from his fraudulent throne, so did Darren Berg. His elaborate house of cards came crashing down.
That just was the beginning of the end for Darren.
He was arrested for embezzling and stashing millions of dollars in exotic offshore accounts.
When people started hearing about Ponzi schemes and a worry about a crumbling housing market, they approached him about getting their investments back, and Darren didn't have the money to pay them back, and so that set off a mad scramble for Darren.
For years, Darren Berg had lived the sweet life. Now, the 51-year-old was about to get his just desserts.
Then they started suing him in court, and they filed lawsuits against him, started seizing his property.
So what did Darren do? He filed for bankruptcy and brokered a deal to help the bankers unravel his crimes. Or so they thought.
The authorities allowed Darren Berg to participate with investigators. The rationale was that it was a very complicated scheme, lots of accounts, lots of paperwork, and who better than Darren Berg to help them decipher it.
But it was all smoke and mirrors.
Darren presented himself as someone who would cooperate. So he was allowed to move from Seattle to take a consulting job in California.
It wasn't long before the feds discovered, like so many other people in Berg's life, they too were being played. Darren was plotting his great escape by stashing money in secret bank accounts in Belize.
He always thought he could stay one step ahead of everybody, ahead of his investors, ahead of the bankruptcy court, ahead of the FBI. He just had this confidence that he could beat it, basically. Beat the rat.
But finally, Berg's time had run out.
Darren Berg was charged with orchestrating Washington State's largest Ponzi scheme.
Berg pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 18 years in the federal pen for fleecing over 800 investors, many of them elderly, out of $140 million in a con he ran over a decade.
He did stand before the federal judge and say that he did these crimes intentionally. He didn't apologize. Darren Berg was not a person to apologize.
Berg spent the next 6 years doing time at various minimum security federal prisons in California.
He's not considered dangerous.
He may not be dangerous, but he is cunning. It was at the Atwater Satellite Work Camp where he performed his ultimate magic trick. He disappeared. Darren Berg was only housed at the Atwater Penitentiary Minimum Security Facility for about a year, but it was enough time for him to realize the only obstacle standing between him and freedom was a fence similar to this. And just beyond the fence, an airport where U.S. Marshals say it's likely Berg hopped a private jet and began his new life as an international fugitive.
The penitentiary, it's in an open field, so there's different means of how he could have escaped, but we're exhausting all leads.
So how is it possible that Berg could simply stroll out of a federal prison?
It's definitely difficult to escape. They do the counts, everybody is watched over, but it's still possible, obviously.
When you showed up, were you looking in all these farmlands in the airport? Were you searching for him literally on foot?
When the team showed up to do their initial investigation, the investigators at the facility, they had already done their own search, and obviously we picked up where they left off.
For now, Darren Berg's whereabouts are anybody's guess. Do you think he's in this country? Where do you think he went?
I have little doubt that he probably is someplace where it's warm and doesn't have an extradition treaty to the United States. There's a number of those places in the Caribbean. They only exist to hide money.
Where Darren Berg is right now is anybody's guess. I wouldn't be surprised if he was in Canada, Mexico, Central America. Nothing about where he is right now would surprise me.
Darren Berg is now 55. His mug is plastered on wanted posters all over. Tips have poured in from around the country. But as of now, the master manipulator is still on the lam. Obviously, one of his best schemes yet.
He's intelligent and cunning to create a Ponzi scheme and take millions of dollars from hundreds of people. There's no stopping to what he's capable of.
Escaping a federal prison carries a penalty of up to 5 years and $250,000 fine. If you have any information on where Berg might be, you're asked to contact the U.S. Marshals at 1-800-336-0102. I'm Chris Hansen. If you like this story, make sure you tune in every day to Crime Watch Daily. You can find where the show airs in your city at crimewatchdaily.com. Watch it live or record it on your DVR and watch it at night. And to all those criminals out there, remember, we are watching.